Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we're bringing you new series about who is Mr. Putin, where did he come from which grey obscurity did he rise to threaten the lives of everybody on this planet. How did we get here? That and more in this new series, Who is Mr. Putin? They were created by an independent production, Acute Angle, and they've been known to Russian-speaking audience for quite a while now. And we are bringing that to a wider audience in English. Enjoy. This photo was taken in St. Petersburg, September 27, 2004, at the funeral of a criminal authority, Roman Tsepov, Belenson, aka Roma-Producer. This photo was added to Litvinenko's case as a proof of Putin's connections with mafia. The funeral was indeed remarkable. Vladimir's cathedral was cordoned off by police. Luxury cars were arriving one after another. A SWAT police squad shot an honor of salute with blanks at the cemetery. Friends and family were of course present. Among them, the head of Interior Ministry of St. Petersburg with his deputies, also head of Interior Ministry for the Northwest Federal District, Putin's head of Secret Service, and the head of Internal Security for the Interior Ministry, urgently arrived from Moscow. Mafia was represented by Vladimir Kumarin, also known as Kum, the head of the most prominent in the city Tambovsky gang, and a number of congressmen, senators, oligarchs, etc. The deceased did not occupy any high-ranking positions during his life, and officially was just the owner of a private security firm. He was 42 years old. Power. Money. He was the untouchable. Greed. Apathy. Yes, I know Vladimir Putin. But everything one day comes to an end. Grey Cardinal. Of course, the deceased was not a simple man. Since 1990s, he maintained friendship with one of St. Petersburg officials, which was not widely known in those times. The official's name was Putin, and they were very close. Due to that friendship, he pulled off a lot of projects. Many of the people present at the funeral owed their positions, rank, or business successes to Roman. He was their cover, their producer, from a capital P. They were leaving Vladimir Cathedral with very heavy hearts and uneasy thoughts, as the deceased did not die from natural causes. He was poisoned by a radioactive substance, which back then, in autumn of 2004, remained unidentified. The death was not quick either. He suffered for 2 weeks from acute radioactive poisoning, bone marrow and liver falling apart, hair falling out, bloody stomatitis in the mouth, white blood cells plummeting, and more other painful symptoms. Someone killed him in a very cruel manner. A police case was opened, but later closed as the investigation stalled. Upon leaving the cathedral, Roma-Producer's mourners were caught by the camera of one of the correspondents of Novaya Gazeta. This is how this famous photo was taken, the one which Judge Robert Owen would add to Litvinenko's case many years later. Indeed, where else can you see the chief of St. Petersburg police and godfather of St. Petersburg Mafia together? And also that the head of Putin's personal protective service would be present. Only at the funeral of Roma-Producer. Although he was murdered in such a gruesome manner, during his lifetime he was the man that he would not want to cross. If he was giving someone advice, it was worth listening to. If he was making an offer, it was worth accepting. In this photo, you can see three bosses of Tambov organized crime syndicate: Khokhol, Kum, and Popeye, left to right. Mikhail Glushenko, Vladimir Kumarin, and Ruslan Kalyak. All three were very close with Roma-Producer. We have already mentioned Kumarin, who attended the funeral with one well-known journalist. Mikhail Glushenko, Misha Khokhol, couldn't come. As he recounted later, in 2002, Roman, whose company was hired to provide personal security, came to Michael and advised that he left the country immediately. There appeared to be some very serious issues with his safety. So Glushenko left immediately. At the time of Roman's death, he was out of the country. It's worth noting that Glushenko is a master of boxing on the international level, one of the really well-known gangsters in St. Petersburg, and also a congressman. And here comes Roman Tsepov, tells him to skedaddle, and Misha immediately skedaddles. Michael lived for a long time in Spain, until in 2009, when he returned to Russia. He was immediately arrested, got 8 years in jail, racketeering, murders, etc., the whole 9 yards. So Roman Tsepov back in 2002 was right to say he can't guarantee his safety. The life of another member of this gang, Ruslan Kalyak, also known as Popeye, also became a cautionary tale. His relations with Roma were complicated. They fought and made peace, and fought again. However, in the early 2000s they fell apart completely. Popeye decided to go against the producer. A writer, Andrei Konstantinov, also a friend of Roman, created a whole encyclopedia of St. Petersburg gangs in his work, Gangster Petersburg. Here's how he described Kalyak in his book. I heard that Tsepov had a very bad relation with Ruslan Kalyak. I also remember Kalyak boasting in person that he burned quite a few of Tsepov's cars, and that he would eventually put him down, and so on. It was around 1998. However, in 2003, that same Ruslan, when I met him by accident, had asked me whether I could arrange his meeting with Tsepov regarding one very important personal matter. Ruslan appeared to be very distressed, and one could tell this whole situation when he had to ask for a meeting with Tsepov was to his major dislike. The result was as follows. Although Popeye had promised to have a homosexual intercourse with Roman, he failed to deliver on his threats. In the summer of 2003, Kalyak was shot in Yalta. A whole clip emptied into him when he was sitting at a beachside cafe. And his business empire, which included several casinos, nightclubs, a share of Pulkovsky Hotel, etc., was taken over by Roman. Here is the writer Andrei Konstantinov on that same photo at Roman Tsepov's funeral. More from his book. There was another story. In early 2004, one St. Petersburg journalist, Maxim Maximov, decided to do a research on how Oleg Deripaska, Russian oligarch, was fighting to grab Arkhangelsk paper mills, an episode also known as Forest Wars of Oligarchs. As it turned out, the physical capture of assets was organized by Roman Tsepov and his two friends, General Zolotov, head of Putin's Secret Service, and General Novikov, head of Interior Ministry, Northwestern Department. Zolotov is a very influential person, also called Generalissimus in Kremlin inner circles. Novikov is a complete protege of Roma-Producer, who actually put him in this position. Naturally, three were not eager to read about their endeavors in press, much less so Deripaska with his companies trading on London Stock Exchange and extensive investor relations. So on June 29, 2004, journalist Maxim Maximov mysteriously disappeared. As it became known later, some person in high police rank, note Russia's police militia forces are controlled by Ministry of Internal Affairs, invited him under pretense of having an interesting information to leak from the police department. Upon arrival at 26 Forstatsky Street, Maximov was led to the gangster sauna in its basement. There he was assaulted by three police officers close to General Novikov. As the witnesses told the investigating detective later, these officers strangled Maxim to death, then wrapped his body in plastic tarp and took it somewhere outside the city. Despite these revelations, the case was closed and nobody was prosecuted. In 2009, 5 years after Maxim's murder, St. Petersburg's journalist held a protest action at the location of his death. They brought flowers, candles, and his portraits, and affixed this plaque onto the building. On June 29, 2004, in the basement of his building, While conducting his journalist investigation, Maxim Maximov was murdered by police officers, says the Black. In 2007, Viktor Alyukhin, a senator from Petersburg, wrote a letter to Attorney General Chaika. How can it be that the following police officers, he names them in an official document, were accused of murdering a journalist who looked into Deripaska's and his friends' dealings? These officers are known and all serve under command of General Novikov, but the investigation is halted, and their ties are apparently going too high up. State Attorney General was the wrong person to complain to about political power ties to criminal. By the way, Roman Tsepov was also an officer of police. Yes, indeed. He bought himself a title of police colonel in Federal Department of Organized Crime back in 1990s. Hence, the honor salute at the funeral. Nothing really surprising. It was St. Petersburg, in fact, where the concept of stripped cover, protection, striped cover, was introduced on a large scale, meaning combined protection by police, gangsters, and KGB. Kremlin, also known as striped cover. Court proceedings in case Litvinenko confirmed that he was investigating Putin's dealing with Tambov gang when they were importing cocaine via St. Pete port. We might as well change 5-point stars over Kremlin for 8-pointers, like these ones. We also don't want you to fall under the impression that Roman Tsepov was some monster, surrounded only by gangsters, rotten police, and dead bodies. In fact, having spent years in true hell of post-Soviet society among Popeye, Generalissimus, and other Deripaskas, Roma retained some sense of his innate creativity. From time to time, his soul longed for artful things, and he produced not only new corrupt cops, but also modern-day movies. The aforementioned writer, Andrei Konstantinov, devoted the following passage to Roma-Producer. In certain circles, Roman Tsepov is a celebrity, despite him being a rather private person. A title of Grey Cardinal suits him rather well. In case anyone is really curious to see him, I can refer you to the TV series Gangster Petersburg. There is a scene when an attorney kills a gangster, Misha the Cut, in front of mafia bosses gathered at the table. Tsepov is one of those ghouls at the round table. That's how it was. He was indeed known as Grey Cardinal in certain gangster circles. He actually gave money to the Gangster St. Petersburg production and played one of the characters in it. That TV series about Petersburg criminal world were well known and well received by Russian audience of that time, along with Brother 2, Brigade, and similar productions. Here it is. That still frame from 2000 with Roma-Producer's face. He's basically playing himself. All is clear. What should we do, Ivanich? Must answer for this. Snuff him. Lying shit. Gotta answer for this. Got too bold. Doesn't want to work. Put him down. Do you hear this, Misha? So, as you understand, Roman Tsepov achieved impressive heights during his lifetime, became successful. How did he achieve it? Where did he come from to the gangster Petersburg? In Soviet times, Roma was a captain in internal troops. He served as an assistant to the head of political department. The detachment was performing guarding duties of one of the prisons. To be accepted into Eternal Troops Academy with the Ministry of Interior, he denounced his dad's surname Belenson and took his mother's maiden name, Tsepov. On this photo, Roman Tsepov at the PE class of the Academy. By the way, he was submaster of sports and biathlon and liked shooting sports in general. However, the military career didn't work for him. In 1990s, he got tired of guarding prisons, resigned from the army, and started a new life. In Petersburg, he built his own crew, well connected to Tambov gang. During the best times, he had over 100 men under him. Since 1992, his crew worked under his private security agency, with an elegant name, Baltic Escort. They started like everyone else, providing cover, protection, collected bad debts. This was not an easy business. In 1990s, Roma survived several assassinations, attempts, and evaded prison. In 1994, he did a brief stint in crosses for armed robbery. He attacked the office of Parallel 60 Company. The case against him, however, was dismissed, and he was quickly released. Later, he bragged that he spent this time with good use and befriended Malish, Baby, the leader of Malyshev gang. In 1999, they tried to put Roma behind bars again, this time for extorting 70,000 from one Gatchina entrepreneur. This case was also dismissed. Igor Gusev, a police ex-director of Petersburg branch of organized crime, 7th Department, the one responsible for investigating leaders of big crime syndicates in the city, in April of 2011 gave an interview to a newspaper, Our Version. I personally met Roman in 1999 while investigating an extortion case. He physically assaulted an entrepreneur and threatened him with a deadly weapon. We added more accusations from these other known endeavors to tighten the case. But all the charges were dropped, case dismissed, when he acquired friends in high places. Later, Tsepov became the biggest menace to our city. With unlimited support of people in power, interfacing with all other crime leaders in the city, he became an untouchable and actually promoted his own people to take positions in City Department of Interior, an equivalent of city or county police. Major Gusev declined commenting further on those other known chapters of Roman's activity they tried to use to bring him down. Those episodes are noteworthy, though. In 1990s, Roma had a lover, this lady. She is known persona in a cultural world these days, writing scenarios, shooting music videos for famous performers. Back then, she started as real estate agent, in an agency protected by Roma. We do not know the reasons, but she left Roma and started to work with Shevchenko brothers, although another branch of Tambov gang. According to Tsepov, she swindled him before doing that by selling him an apartment which had a lien on it from the bank. There were suspicions of some personal conflict, though. Russian Courier newspaper covered this story. In September of 1999, St. Petersburg district attorney opened a criminal case against Tsepov, Belokopitov, and Kuznetsov, charging them with CCRF 163, Part 3A and 3B. The crime occurred on the 25th of June, the same year, when three of them arrived at the office of Baltic Steel Corp and demanded 70,000 from company owner Bratchikov. Kuznetsov and Tsepov have physically attacked the businessman and caused him bodily harm. A month later, this case was combined with case 990711, opened earlier in September 16th, where Tsepov was facing similar charges of CCRF 163, Part 3B. This one for attempting to extort 100,000 from Irina Afanasieva during the period from December of 1998 to August 1999, and threatening death to her and her little son if she doesn't pay. This was under disguise of a contract breach, as she refused to use his firm's protective services. By August, Tsepov managed to obtain about $80,000 worth of Irina's property as payback. This is his ex, the one whom he threatened to murder, including her underage son. When Putin came to power in 2000 and no charges against Roman were dropped, he managed to initiate a criminal prosecution against Irina, and she got 5 years for real estate machinations. Her problems ended only with Roman's death. However, she never returned into real estate business again. Major Gusev, who was in charge of 1999 Tsepov investigations, delicately omitted the names of Roman's benefactors, who protected him from getting jail time. Understandably so, the interview was taken in 2011, and benefactors were getting ready for re-election. Another peculiar element of this case was that Major Gusev was working in the 7th Department of St. Petersburg Ministry of Interior, exactly the same department where Roman bought his police rank of undercover officer. Thus, Gusev was basically investigating his own colleague. A script worth the movie, but this was the reality of life in Russia in those times. A gangster and a police officers, two in one. Roman was a criminal of a new type, and untouchable to the old methods of police work. June 2004, St. Petersburg. Roman Tsepov at his alma mater, Military School of Higher Political Education, Ministry of Interior, starring at a charity event, gifting students TVs and home theater systems for the rec rooms. So, how did Roma get acquainted with his benefactors omitted by Major Gusev? This is not a secret. Back in '94, Roman acquired one exclusive client for his protective services company. City administration of St. Petersburg asked him to provide personal protection detail to Vice Mayor, Mr. Putin. Secret Service could not legally be involved because of the rank. That's why a private firm was brought in. And that's how Roma met Putin. This acquaintance is what propelled him to the top of criminal Mount Olympus of St. Petersburg. It also brought upon the end of him. So why did city administration pick exactly that protective services company? Who brought Roma-Producer into Smolny, a historic building headquarters of St. Pete administration? This honor belongs to his friend, Viktor Zolotov, officer of Secret Service and Sobchak's city mayor's bodyguard. Roman's company had established relations with Secret Service. FSO agents were paid to train his employees and also were willing to do some work on the side. That's how they made friends. Later there were some publications that Zolotov even had unofficially a share of Roman's company, and that is why he promoted him so actively. But, be as it may, Roma has ultimately achieved his goal, got into the high-power establishment. Viktor Zolotov, also known as Generalissimus, a very important figure in Kremlin. In 1991, he was part of Yeltsin's detail and even stood on a tank next to him at the Moscow White House Parliament during the coup attempt of 1991. Later, he was sent to St. Petersburg to help its mayor Sobchak. In 1996, after Sobchak failed to get re-elected, Zolotov was fired from FSO and went to work in Roma's company. However, in 2000, his old friends brought him back, and Putin appointed him the head of President's Secret Service. Since 2013, Viktor Zolotov takes position of General of Russian Internal Troops, a very trusted position in Putin's inner circle, as he is tasked with stopping national protests if they occur. Who could have thought back in '91 that tall guy behind Yeltsin's back will one day come to the forefront and guard the corrupt Putin's government? By the way, the child between Zolotov and St. Pete's mayor on this black and white photo is little Ksenia Sobchak. It is highly improbable that the mayor himself, who was smack in the middle of all Putin and Zolotov's activity, was completely unaware of it and did not have a share of proceeds. Not much is known about Zolotov's personal qualities. Sergei Tretyakov, an officer of military foreign intelligence who defected to states in 2000, says he knew Zolotov and had characterized him as a common thug. Alexander Korzhakov, an ex-KGB general and Zolotov's ex-boss during his early FSO days under Yeltsin, plain out hates him. They had a lot of conflicts. When asked about Zolotov by Russian New Times during his interview in 2014, Korzhakov said, "I will not talk about this scumbag. Zolotov is very vindictive, as well as our head of state, with whom he is very close. And I am an old retired man who has family and children. Why would I need all the trouble?" It is curious that Putin and Zolotov do not only share common vicious vindictive character trait, they even look somewhat alike, with tight lips and narrow-set, small, cold eyes. Anyway, let's get back to Roma the producer. Many people had various degrees of friendship with powerful political figures. It doesn't mean much by itself. However, Roman Tsepov was a very goal-oriented man, and he squeezed maximum from his friendship of his. It all started with casinos, which needed business licenses to operate legally. Sobchak, then mayor and head of St. Pete administration, appointed Putin in charge of this process. He took upon this activity with enthusiasm. This was a classic scheme. The license cost a bribe to enter the market. Continuous operation also cost regular bribing with monthly payments. There was one major problem, though, as most all casinos were owned by gangsters. Someone had to interface with them and resolve any operational matters. This rowdy bunch was constantly warring with each other. It was common that one would sponsor a visit by a tax audit commission upon its competitors or swat them, or tip the police, when to bust in order to find all illegal cash and drugs. Malyshev gang was especially known for getting rid of competitors in this manner. In other words, these matters required a negotiator, trusted by all sides to settle their disputes. Of course, Putin could do it all by himself. He had Konstantin Goloshyapov, an old judo buddy in Tambov gang, and also his personal coach, Leonid Usvetsov, known as Leonid the Sportsman, until he was murdered. In Malyshev gang, he had another friend of his youth, ex-wrestler Gennady Petrov. On this photo, there are heads of Malyshev gang, Gennady Petrov on the left and Alexander Malyshev on the right. It might be hard to believe, but in 1990s, Petrov was actually one of the founders of the Bank of Russia, the one which is used by Putin as his wallet. In June 2007, according to Spanish surveillance, it was Gennady whom Bastrykin thanked for his appointment as the head of SKR, Investigative Committee of Russia, similar to FBI. Let's get back to casino. Money is great, but someone has to be in constant contact with these nice people, wearing golden chains and crosses. Here's when destiny sent Roma to meet Putin. Roman knew both gangsters and police and liked interfacing with them all. He was actually pretty good at it. With Roma's entrance, the system of corrupt casino licensing in St. Petersburg looked complete. Now, Sobchak's administration was just collecting money from it. All other matters were settled by Roma. This was just the beginning, testing of the system. Bigger things started later, when Roman achieved a new level. When Roman, besides providing protective services, started selling positions in Ministry of Interior, FSB, and other federal institutions. That is when he got his nickname, Roma-Producer. Producer because he was producing not only TV series, but also people to various lucrative positions of power. In September 2004, a lot of different people came to pay their last goodbyes to Roman's funeral. Vladimir Kumarin, Kum of Tambov gang, Mikhail Vanishkin, head of St. Pete's Ministry of Interior. Of course, Vanishkin knew that Kum would be present. Roman had close ties with Tambov gang. Of course, Vanishkin understood that he should not be attending funerals of criminal authorities at all. On the other hand, how could he not come, when it was Roman who helped him to buy this position in 2002? FSB General Konstantin Romodanovsky also attended this funeral, although he is not present in that famous photo. He was the head of internal security for Ministry of Interior in 2001-2005, the main corruption figure in the police. He was a big friend of Roma's. Romodanovsky today is an assistant of President's representative in Central Federal Region. They fought corruption together, and since General Romodanovsky was in attendance, how could Vanishkin not be? Konstantin Poltoranin, press secretary of Romodanovsky at that time, in his interview 2012, said, Tsepov, Putin's friend from St. Pete, appeared to have never left Romodanovsky office in those days. It actually appears Roma did not leave most of the high offices of internal affairs and FSB at that time. This is Dmitry Zapolsky, a well-known political analyst and journalist of the period. He was also closely acquainted with Roman Tsepov. He emigrated from Russia in 2012, as he says, so they won't have to waste polonium on me, and now is living in Thailand. Here's an excerpt from his interview given to Radio Svoboda on September 11, 2015. Roman Tsepov, with Viktor Zolotov, assistants, had created a system that allowed him to be an intermediary between government and criminal structures, between police and mafia. Then they came up with an idea to monetize police system, to get cash for dropped charges, for releases from jail, for made-up criminal charges. It worked well for Roman. The whole system of power was for sale, be it general's position or lower. What was Tsepov's utility? He was simply receiving money for the appointments of chiefs of district police, traffic police supervisors, city police bosses, FSB officers and generals, Federal Information Service officials, tax authorities, etc. He was getting suitcases of cash for each appointee and negotiated the details. It looked like this. Roman would tell Kumarin, you will have 2 district police chiefs. To Mirilashvili, you will also have 2 police chiefs. To Kostya the Grave, you will also have 2 police chiefs. And to someone less prominent, you will have 1. If he asked why just 1, Roman would usually answer, because you only have 100 men, and Kumarin has 300. You're not big enough. Grow a bit. Such trade of positions in a single city, and later in the whole country, is not just a form of corruption. It's more of a kleptocracy, when the entire system and entire state is designed for theft and bribes. One can find such systems in place with Russia's southern neighbors, Tajikistan, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, and in some other countries of Africa and select banana republics of Latin America. Here's the World Corruption Index of 2015. Russia is smack between Sierra Leone and Guyana, and lower than Honduras at 112th. So, during 15 years of Putin's regime, Russia has beat Honduras in corruption. I think this is a resounding success. Here is a bit more from Dmitry Zapolsky's interview about our journey to Honduras, so to say. The system was created to get money from any appointment, from the street beat trooper to the chief of city police. By the end of 1990s, early 2000s, the whole executive personnel of St. Petersburg police were appointed with Tsepov's assistance. All heads of district offices and above had to interview with Tsepov in person, after which he would recommend hiring or not. Next, this candidacy would be reviewed at Viktor Zolotov's level, and the appointment was finalized or not, and everyone paid. Roman Tsepov was very tight with Zolotov. That's why he was relied upon to control drug trafficking and all payoffs for the Interior Ministry appointments. The system appeared as a proof of concept in 1990s, and by 2000s it became a government vehicle. It was first tested on St. Petersburg casinos, and later adopted as monetization scheme for all positions of power. Roma was a smart guy. He and Putin perfected that system on gang-owned casinos and then scaled it up to the whole government. In Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan fashion, it is not an easy feat. And while selling positions with Zolotov and Putin, Roman did not forget about his personal protective agency. One can see how it worked on this good example. In 1991, Perm Gang, represented by Alexander Tkachenko, also known as Tkach, tried to shake down a furniture salesman in St. Petersburg. His name was Anatoly Serdyukov. Tkach wanted to receive part of this business profits, but as it turned out, this particular business was already working with Malashev's gang. So Malashev and his friend Petrov had to deal with perm guys, and they did. When later, in 2007-2012, Serdyukov became the Minister of Defense, he did not forget his benefactors, and they were invited to share in profiteering from federal military contracts, albeit they had to do it from Spain. The bosses of Malashev gang lived there since late 1990s. Spanish Police Department of Surveillance was amused to witness close relations between Mafia and Russian Defense Ministry. How did it come to be? Of course, from the gangs of St. Petersburg. Put Serdyukov in jail? Perhaps go there myself too? By the way, the destiny of Tkach, who tried to partake in profits from Serdyukov's business, was not at all successful. In '98, he got big problems. Gangster's fortune fickle. He almost got killed in one of the takedowns and turned to Roma for protection. Roma was rather welcoming and assigned his own nephew as a bodyguard to Tkach. Later, in 2002, something didn't go well between Tkach and his bodyguard. They quarreled. Tkach refused to pay his debts and even tried to kill the nephew. Then he fled abroad, thinking he would be safe there. Wrong. The whole St. Petersburg police got on his tail. Apparently, since 1989, his perm gang was notoriously dangerous in St. Petersburg. Everyone was looking for Tkach now. So they managed a smart operation of luring him back to Russia, where he was arrested and got 15 years in jail for attempted murder. Roma showed who's the real boss and put Tkach in place. However, this conviction was announced in 2005, when Roman was already murdered and buried. What was Tsepov killed for, and by whom? There were plenty of theories at first. After all, for 15 years he was in the middle of gang life. There already were attempts at his life in the 90s. Eventually all theories proved to be wrong, except one. When Alexander Litvinenko was murdered in London, their symptoms matched 100%. What the doctor saw was controversial with most regular medical books. On one hand, the patient exhibited all symptoms of acute radiation poisoning: acute drop of leukocytes count in blood, complete destruction of the immune system, damage to the spinal nerves, hair falling out. On the other, Geiger counter did not show any radiation in the urine and blood analysis, when they should. Peter Perumov, the doctor who treated Roman Tsepov at the time of his passing, in his 2006 interview was describing the state of his patient as follows. Clinical picture is exactly like an acute radiation poisoning. However, dosimeters show nothing. Now everyone knows how this can be. Radiation poisoning without detectable radiation. One needs a very rare and expensive isotope, polonium-210. It gives almost no gamma radiation, and Geiger counter do not see it. It emits only weak alpha rays, which can be detected only several centimeters outward. One can be poisoned only by direct contact or taking it inside, for example by drinking a tea, where water-dissolving polonium capsule was placed a few minutes earlier. One needs special dosimeters to detect alpha radiation. These are rare and are not readily available for doctors or CSI personnel. In all likelihood, they will not even think about it. This equipment belongs to radioactivity labs and research institutes. That's what happened in London. On his last day, when Litvinenko was already dying, his analysis was taken to a military lab dealing with nuclear weapons. That's where alpha spectrometry was done, and the world learned that he was poisoned by a massive amount of polonium. A very clean kind, which can be obtained only in the high-end centrifuge. This is the last photo of Litvinenko, one day before his death. As it turned out, polonium-210 is manufactured only by one country on Earth and one factory, scientific manufacturing company Avangard, town Arzamas 16, Russia. And that is when investigation got interested in Roman Tsepov's death as well. Polonium-10 is a strategic nuclear material, the use of which is under strict control and government regulation. Thus, there could be only one person to have ordered such an exotic murder: Putin. What could be the motive for Putin to kill an old friend and companion, Roman Tsepov? One popular theory is that in summer of 2004, Roma was silly enough to interject himself between Putin and Khodorkovsky in the conflict around Yukos oil. Well, and of course to take a share of this service. However, Putin, Timchenko and Sechin, who started the whole ordeal, were not happy to receive this help. The last thing they needed is for Yukos oil to escape their grasp. So they decided to get rid of Tsepov. Although, personally, I think that Roma signed his death warrant earlier, back in 2003, when he gave a reckless interview to Kirill Metelev, this journalist from St. Petersburg. It was for the magazine City. Roma, all of a sudden, told that he knows Putin since 1994, that their acquaintance happened as a casual thing. Vice Mayor Putin could not be assigned an official security detail. At that time, he was overseeing the privatization of Baltic Sea Company, which director was just murdered. So, Mayor's office signed an official contract with my Baltic escort. I assigned bodyguards who could provide an appropriate level of security. I would like to clarify, Mr. Putin never turned to Mr. Tsepov and asked for security services. This initiative came from the city administration, a bureaucrat who was in charge of such questions. Any insinuation of our personal commercial interests and relations is a complete insanity. It looked as though Roma did not divulge anything inappropriate in this interview. How did he meet Putin? Via work. Who introduced you? The representative of city administration in charge of these questions. Commercial connections between us? For God's sake, no. However, this interview, in a modest-sized local media outlet, caused a scandal which came down from the Kremlin itself. One could read between the lines something very different. Putin has known Tsepov for a long time. But Tsepov is a well-known criminal authority, Roma the producer. They were introduced via a city administration representative who was controlling such matters. That would be Zolotov, who is in charge of Putin's secret service now, and was in charge of protecting Mayor Sobchak back then. No commercial ties, so why would Roma be called producer? And how come there is a crowd of oligarchs and generals around him? In an old Soviet movie, Diamond Hand, a chief, Michael Ivanich, retorts, "As my one dead friend used to say, I knew too much." It appears that Tsepov realized his mistake. Having already given that interview, he called the author and demanded the article to be taken down. What happened later, Metelev describes as follows. Tsepov was scary in his anger. I almost got my phone speaker shoved up in my head. My other eardrum was being torn by wailings of colleagues who have been triggered by harsh but very well-appointed phrases that Roma used. They probably thought that our magazine will not survive to see the next issue. A week later, one our common acquaintance from Moscow came to visit our office. Big stars on his shoulders were shining even through a business suit. As appropriate for a real KGB officer, he was very polite and was inquiring if everything is well, how was the magazine business going, what's new in his Petersburg, and then he suddenly asked if I really do not want to have any relations with Roman in the future. That this interview was brought by well-intending people to the very top and spiced up with some remarks. That this publication at this historic time caused fury at the highest level of power. That this highest power is now seeing it as a provocation of his secret enemies, probably paid handsomely in by foreign currency. The journalist basically received a major talk-down and was made aware that a mere mentioning of Putin's name in this article was infuriating. That people may come up with all kinds of conspiracies, like Putin being a member of some gang, not even talking about what dirt foreign intelligence can propagate. This is Dmitry Skarga, a businessman and ex-director of Soviet merchant fleet, who immigrated to the UK in 2006. In 2015, he gave an interview for a BBC documentary, Putin's Secret Riches. In this interview, he curiously describes his relations with Timchenko, a friend of Putin who back in 2000 was a nobody and now is a billionaire in Forbes rating. It is said that in a narrow circle of friends, Timchenko, when answering the question about his wealth, would usually point his finger to the skies and say that this money belongs to Mikhail Ivanich, who controls everything. Mikhail Ivanich is Putin's nickname in Kremlin, just like that chief from Diamond Hand. So, in looking for reasons for an amazing rise to power, followed by a deadly plunge down of a Petersburg adventurist Roman Tsepov, one can come to a short answer. All this money belongs to Mikhail Ivanich.